Hello, everyone. I'm John McDonald, American playwright. Hello, Magnus.
You can't see it now, audience, but at this moment I am dancing around in a tight sequin magician's outfit, being the fabulous co-host.
And that's because season one of Sabrina is one of your favorite seasons. Actually, it's one of the episodes I think they have out of order on Hulu for Sabrina the Teenage Witch, because I vaguely recall it being in season two, and I think they have it in season one on Hulu. Um,
I think you're right. I believe it was. It's very odd. I believe it was shown to us as season one. It
yeah.
might be season two.
What's nice about seasons one, two, and all the way up until when she solves her family secret, almost, I think they have the same opening theme. They don't transition to the one with Bubbles until she solved. No, she. What was it? So they say you have to solve the family secret, but when she gets her witch's license, it's discover the family secret, and then they change it to solve the family secret. I think I like discover more. I can't figure out which.
And on that note, everyone should realize that this is the second part of our Sabrina the Teenage Witch special.
Yes.
It's
Sadly, we're not coming to you live from Rome or Australia or Paris or any of the other locations. But we're not coming to you live from the Animal Kingdom right after its opening, which is what they did when they sent Sabrina to Disney World for
oh,
one episode.
what an interesting episode. I wonder whether that
It,
was a promotional thing by
it,
Disney
it
or
was. That's why she didn't have to go to Epcot or Magic Kingdom. It was Animal Kingdom just opened and we need people to come because nobody was going to Animal Kingdom at first because it was basically just a
uh,
zoo, I guess.
so
Um,
that is why they magicked Harvey into that presenter's outfit, the safari expert outfit with all the kayak shorts and such, and
yeah,
he was doing that tour of the Animal
uh,
Kingdom.
which is actually one of the best rides in the Animal Kingdom. Like when I did Disney World, um, I did breakfast at Tusker House, which was still really good back then. It was a really nice buffet, and then you go on the safari ride, and it's like a nice little 10-minute thing where you just get to sit and you get to see all the animals sleeping because it's daytime, so none of them are awake.
It sounds very relaxing.
It was.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's also because at this point, Disney didn't own the universe. They only really owned ABC and ESPN at that point, I think. And so it was not the first time that a show had done that. Like Boy Meets World and Family Matters both had Disney episodes. And the Boy Meets World centered around uh, the restaurant in Epcot where you can eat next to the fish tank, whose name I can never remember. And Family Matters went to the Magic Kingdom. And of course, we see it again in ABC tradition because Modern Family did an episode at Disneyland. Um, and they show the park as like half empty, which never happens. I'm always amused by shows that go to Disney and they show it where there's like nobody in the giant walkways. I'm like, this is not. Where's the Brazilian tour group with like 500 people? Where's the kids having meltdown because they're not getting a churro? Where does the Disneyland that I know and love, kind of thing?
where is the presentation of Gay Day at Disney with all
I
the
do love Gay
rainbow Mickey
Day.
ears everywhere?
I have never been able to go to gay days, but I'm always happy for people to do. I have gotten to have they do like a rainbow cake. It's nice. It's vanilla. Um, it's pleasant.
Lovely. I've never been either, but then again, it might be slightly more difficult for me.
Well,
A
you're
bit more
close.
tricky.
I don't know if Disneyland Paris does it, but if Disneyland Paris does, it's a nice day trip. So
Oh yes, I'll just jump on the Eurostar and be over in Disneyland Paris before you can twinkle your toes.
I thought like everything in Europe was like 3 hours from each other. That's what I've been told is that like you go 3 hours and you're in like the next country over or something like that.
Yes, technically, you can get to a lot of places in Europe within 3 to 4 hours, but that's not accounting all of the waiting at the airport.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, what I really don't under something I was kind of bugged me about Sabrina was that they never really did traveling episodes, except for things like going to places in the outer realms, like when Sabrina goes to the place on the it's like a ski chalet thing on Mars. I don't remember Where she went
Yes,
exactly.
she and her aunts went away. I think it was for New Year's. They went to Mars for the slopes and everything.
Oh yeah, that's where she had her temptation moment, the first temptation moment of many in the series,
Mm,
trying to destroy her relationship with Harvey, which they never successfully did. So
mm. Speaking of which, the thing with Harvey is, I wonder whether they didn't realize, the writers earlier on, how much they'd shot themselves in the foot by having Sabrina and Harvey get together really during season one. And by the end of season one, they were dating and they were going nice and steady throughout season two and such. I wonder if they started thinking, oh crap, we've made our key relationship too strong too quickly. Now we've got to find ways to
well, they have.
torment lovebirds a bit.
I think part of it was how much chemistry Nate and
Mm.
Melissa had on screen together as Harvey and Sabrina. Because when I think of Harvey and Sabrina, I'm not even sure Harvey. I don't even remember Harvey in the comics. Like because the Sabrina comics are so Sabrina centric, I don't even remember if Harvey is part of it. Um, but
No,
it's
no. Sorry,
yeah.
go
But
on.
the thing about it is that they had so much chemistry. I don't think they really, because in the first season he just kind of, he's very subversive because he's not as like angry masculine like a football player on like Boston Public was or something like that, where it wasn't this like hostility masculinity. And so when they bring in Brad later on, they try to solve that by making Brad this super hostile masculine character to contrast Harvey. It doesn't work, but all of Sabrina's boyfriends are like Harvey. Dashiell is a lot
Mm.
like Harvey. Like she denotes them both as sweet and kind. Josh is in some ways like Harvey if Harvey was artistic, and Aaron was Harvey if Harvey had had a lot of money. Uh, and I always find it kind of interesting that the guy that she dates is always really just a permutation of Harvey. Uh,
So in a way, I mean, Harvey and the other Harveys, as we can call them, they represent sort of like idealistic dream boys in a sense, because
maybe
they were
and yeah, and they're
they're
safe. They're safe dream boys.
they're safe, they're supportive. I'm sure a lot of people were during their teenage years would always imagine their ideal partner, as it were, and like the rush of young love and romance. And I think that is something they actually did quite well with the Sabrina and Harvey moments. I always loved the little, true love episode that they did, and how
Yeah,
I forget which aunt it was. It was the uh, I forget
Zelda's the ones
Zelda.
like when it's
That's it.
16, it's always true love, which
True
I
love.
appreciate. It's very sweet.
And she didn't tell Sabrina because she wanted it to sort of be her thing. And I really appreciated that. That was a lovely tender moment.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that Harvey has kind of quintessential soft masculinity in the episodes where he has to
Mm.
be, because they have episodes where he's like a knight in shining armor. In the later season, when he comes back to be her best friend and he's dating Morgan, who is the Aunt Hilda analog after Carolyn Ray has left the show, essentially. Uh, Even in their friendship, even in the episode where Katrina breaks out of Other Realm Twin Cities, Other Realm Minneapolis, I guess, I don't know, um, and tries to spark up, there was always a spark between them. There was always something, even when she couldn't pick between him and Dashiell, and it was clear that it was like a thing that the writers were trying to do. He was always very accepting and patient of Sabrina in a way that other people in Sabrina's life weren't. Because even her aunts,
Mm.
and Salem sometimes would dunk on her for being kind of ditzy or scatterbrained or not paying attention. And I never got the sense that Harvey did any of that in the show.
No, even during the crazy moments when clearly there was something going on, Harvey was still always
Yeah.
very supportive. And he may have not liked a few situations when things were like,
I mean,
something really bad was going on, but he never had a go at Spring about it.
he didn't like being lied to. I think the one time when you can tell that he's pushed too far is when she's hugging Josh, when they introduce Josh and they introduce the idea. They're starting to do the idea of Sabrina maturing, the idea of Sabrina pulling away. They introduce Josh, who's kind of supposed to be this mature new version of Harvey, someone who she has more interests aligned with Josh than she did with
Mm,
Aaron or Harvey, because her work wanting to do journalism, his work as a photographer, even his kind of weird arrested development thing where he works at but doesn't own the coffee shop, which I think he actually owns in the season where Hilda buys the clock shop before she owns the coffee place. Uh,
yes, that
yeah,
was a
so he's kind of got that. He's almost the perfect boyfriend for Sabrina, but he's not Harvey.
mm,
Um, and even after he leaves to like
mm,
work for the Peace Corps or Africa or whatever he did, he went to Africa. I remember that much.
yeah.
By the way, this is my favorite new fact: is when the guy that played what is his name? The guy that plays Josh. What is his name? When he does the movie, they did a Christmas movie. Melissa Joan Hart and David Lasher did a Christmas movie. And one of the YouTube people that does pop culture that I follow said it was like the Christmas equivalent of wet cardboard or something like that, which is a horrible thing to say. And I'm sad to think of it's kind of hilarious. Because when they were on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, they didn't have as much chemistry as Harvey had with Sabrina, but Josh was kind of, in a way, the perfect college boyfriend. And
Mm.
it was one of those things where most of Harvey's boyfriends you never really saw the true flaws of, because it was never that kind of show. But of all the boyfriends you had, the one that would have worked best in a career kind of Ally McBeal setting probably would have been Josh.
And having a think now, actually, that makes me wonder, going back to my point before about Harvey and the other Harveys being like ideal dream boys for Sabrina. Um, the First of all, with the clash between Harvey and Josh, like that is almost like a typical fantasy. You know, two men who really like you fighting over you.
Yeah.
What young gay boy hasn't imagined that before when they get slightly romantic? And secondly, when you were saying about Harvey, sorry, about Josh being more of like a college age
Yeah.
boyfriend for Sabrina, really good point because, in a sense, Harvey was the perfect high school boyfriend. You know, the guy that you hold your hand in the corridor, go to the game with, that sort of thing. Josh is more studious, more artistic, as you said, has more relevant interests, the ideal boyfriend for college. And maybe you could almost see the clash between Harvey and Josh being Sabrina in the midst of transitioning from sort of a high school mentality, younger girl mentality, and she's starting to sort of venture out into adulthood.
Yeah. And they do that in the episode. That's exactly what they do in the episode where we
Mm,
meet Josh. Is she's choosing to go somewhere with Josh over going to a game or watching Harvey in a game in senior year.
yes.
So instead of like the marker, he's even in the prom episode, the prom episode that's not about prom, which I'm always going to bugged by, because of all the markers that Sabrina didn't get to do, not being able to have a full, even a half night of prom, I think is the one that bothered me more than anything. Um, and I have one more thing to say about Harvey, and
Mm,
then I think that leads nicely into the idea of Sabrina the Teenage Witch as a maturity show.
mm,
Coming of age story really is what it is.
mm,
When I think about Harvey, I always think about Harvey kind of in the context of the '90s safe Tiger Beat dream boy, because I
mm.
often call Sabrina kind of the Melissa Joan Hart slash Sabrina, the unsung pop princess of the kind of pre TRL era, the beginning of TRL. You can think about Harvey almost as a analog for kind of the Lance Bass, Justin Timberlake with the ramen noodle hair, kind of that safe dreamboat. Whereas you had people like there was the cousin that lived in the van in Step by Step, who was kind of this wonderful yet nerdy, but really safe, vaguely had a girlfriend type of guy. And then you get
Mm,
someone like Boy Meets World, where you have Ryder Strong and you have Corey's older brother, who were both kind of womanizers, but they're safe womanizers.
mm,
And because it's part of that TGIF lineup, they never talk about virginity or anything like that. Boy Meets World did, but it was like an episode. The prom episode of Boy Meets World is great if you want to do like a safe sex kind of thing, because like the virginity is the whole point of prom. Losing your virginity, which always tickles me. But like, if you look at Melissa Joan Hart doing Sabrina, doing even Clarissa before that, doing You Drive Me Crazy with Adrian Grenier, which is a great movie if you've never seen it, with the great ballad by Britney Spears, You Drive Me Crazy is actually from the movie You Drive Me Crazy, I believe, if I remember correctly. Um, yeah, so it's just one of those things where when I think about Harvey, I kind of compare him to what we have at the time, which is that kind of Tiger Beat, not quite hunky, but not nerdy enough to not be hunky. Um,
mm.
and it's a very TV thing, because like in films at the time we didn't have that kind of thing, because coming of age films were very different. Um, yeah, but so that was my thing. Looking at Harvey in context, is he's kind of part of that troop of really safe, not too dangerous. I would argue that Ryder Strong as Sean, especially in the earlier seasons of Boy Meets World, is more avarice and more sexualized than Harvey was in any of the seasons. Even like when Sabrina's at the end of her experience in college, except for Harvey in the final episode and like the black tank and the black pants, you never really see Harvey as a sexualized character in a lot of ways, which
No,
which is interesting.
I would say that he was the perfect um, teenage heartthrob for the magazines that you would get for young kids
If
off
you could
the shelf.
afford them.
You could put them on. You put him smiling nice and bashfully on the cover, hands in his pockets and everything. He was the ideal boy for that demographic, in a sense.
Right up there with Devon Sawa. Yeah, even look at his hair. He even has that Devon Sawa like widow's peak hair thing going on in some of these. I'm trying to see if yeah, he was in Teen Beat. I actually see a Pinterest picture of him in like a Henley in like a Teen Beat thing. It's great. 25 cutest sitcom guys. There he is in like a really bad shiny fake leather jacket shirt. Um, oh man, Teen Beat photo shoots are the best.
Ooh, so just before I move on to the maturity um, discussion, one thing I should say, something that occurred to me that I should point out was earlier on in the conversation, I mentioned about how it felt like they set up Harvey and Sabrina quite early on as a very strong couple, and then they had to sort of retroactively write in ways because they went through that whole thing where the aunts were encouraging Sabrina to cool it with Harvey and try dating other people.
Well, and
Um,
Harvey's parents
that,
did that too. That was the
yeah,
whole point of that
yeah,
mid-season one thing. Yeah.
and I wasn't. That is something I was slightly sketchy about because it felt like they were trying to push that a little bit. But anyway, that's beside the point. My main thing was actually think about it. The thing is, you have to keep in mind that no one really expected Sabrina to blow up the way it did. Um, because they brought out season one and it became one of the biggest things for the teenage demographic of the time, but they couldn't have predicted that. So that's probably something that had a factor into it. You know, they wrote Harvey and Sabrina in a way for season one, and then they had to adjust the approach going forward, shall we say, when things got popular and they were going to keep writing on for some more seasons, as it were.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because at that point Melissa Joan Hart, um, she had done Clarissa, and after that,
Mm,
when she was shopping new things before her mom took over, so Heartbreak Films is her family production company, essentially. like Melissa Joan Hart's mom was executive producer, I think, on the first season of Sabrina, especially, and now she's executive producer of Heartbreak Films, I think is the name of it. Um, and it's kind of like she was almost in Scream. She was
Oh wow.
like she has yeah the role that Nev Campbell got was one she auditioned for. She also auditioned for Sarah Michelle Gellar's role in I Know What You Did Last Summer, but she didn't want to do horror films. And so like at the time, she was a really known quantity outside of Nickelodeon. Like when you talk about Amanda Bynes getting her own career,
Hmm.
often you think of her in terms of Nickelodeon. You don't really think of Melissa Joan Hart in terms of Disney because ABC still really felt like its own thing. The TGIF lineup, the stuff happening at Nickelodeon with Snick really felt like its own kind of evening lineup world. And I think that's something to think about when we think about Melissa Joan Hart, though she took kind of the same path as Amanda Bynes, we think of them completely separately. Um,
Hmm.
and I find that really interesting. And now that we've talked about Adrian Grenier, I want to talk about The Devil Wears Prada at some point, but we'll get there. I have to be patient. So,
All in good time, sir.
oh,
There's
good
plenty of
time.
podcasts
There's
to
so many things in pop culture.
there's going to be plenty of podcasts to explore every nugget of popular and niche culture.
Yeah. And when we do our Queer as Folk episode, when we do American Queer as Folk, especially, I can talk about the link between Sabrina and Queer as Folk because there is one which I really like. So,
And well, you mentioned that to me earlier, and I was going to say you're
yeah.
aware of the link between Power Rangers and Queer as Folk as well.
Well, I've got a link between Power Rangers and Firefly, which is really
Oh,
fun. So,
that's
yeah.
interesting.
So Jewel State, who was on Firefly, was on this show as a kid called Space Cases, where she played an imaginary best friend. And Walter Jones was on that show, I think, before he played the Black Power Ranger. So I know there's definitely a link between those things. And I know that Soleil Moon Frye is Punky Brewster. Soleil Moon Frye was friends with Melissa Joan Hart for years, and they're still friends. Um, so I don't know the link. So
I will mention my link quickly, but first of all, I should say it's all connected. It's one great big web of connections.
it's true.
The very I'll just speak about this briefly, and then we'll go on back to the central discussion of the podcast. The link for Power Rangers and Queer as Folk was the actor that played Sky in Power Rangers SPD. I think his name is Chris Violetti. He was Jim Bunny number 2 in a couple of
Oh, it's great.
episodes of Queer as Folk, and it was just basically him standing there pressing pressing benches,
Yeah.
lifting weights, just basically being nice eye candy. And then he got on to Power Rangers.
Yeah.
So
It's one of those things where yeah. So I was doing because I had remembered this when I was doing research. So in season 4, like when they're still trying to figure out what to do with Hilda and Zelda, now that Sabrina doesn't need them as mentors so much, she still
hmm,
needs them as mentors because they need someone to explain some of the intricacies of magic, which is where they kind of fail when they completely get rid of them and try to replace them with Roxy and Morgan, which I'd actually like to talk about. But so Hilda has the clock shop, and she
hmm.
has the magical grandfather clock that no one has warned her about. And even though she's a witch, she can't tell it's magic, I guess. Um, and so people come out of the clock to create a house. So one of them is Daniel Boone, who everyone
Hmm.
calls Davy Crockett, and it's a really funny subplot. But the guy that played Daniel Boone would go on to play Drew Boyd in the American Queer as Folk. And I don't think in the British Queer as Folk, I think this is part of the later seasons that the British one doesn't have. But Drew Boyd was the football player that fell in love with Emmett and
Um,
came out.
no, we didn't have that in the
No.
UK version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the guy that played Drew Boyd, um, he was because I got really distracted when I watched the episode. I'm like, I know this face. Where do I know this face from? And normally I can tell right away. And it was because I had basically seen the guy in nothing but his underwear because there's like a whole plot line about about the football player becoming comfortable with his body essentially and doing a photo shoot in his underwear.
Mm.
Um, anyway, so yeah, so there's a connection there, which gives me a lot of chuckles. It was also a really sweet couple episodes because Hilda and Zelda have a lot of trouble with their love lives in the show. And it was really sweet to see Hilda get someone who kind of understood and would romance her. Because really, the only love interest either of the aunts gets seriously is Vice Principal, then Principal Willard Kraft. And Martin Mull was
Mhm.
a buffoon. Although his ex-wife, who's secretly a witch in the episode where it's revealed that mortals like have a level of magic they can withstand, her her his ex-wife was played Allison on Designing Women, who came in to replace not Suzanne, so who came in to replace I've forgotten her name. Anyway, so it's a character from like the second season of Designing Women when they bring in the cousin that nobody liked. Um, and it's really cool. The concept is really cool. The idea of um, both Hilda and Zelda wanting romance, which I think is really great to show. But then also kind of the unexpected shoe drop of the more that you're with mortals and the more magic you give them, the more that they absorb magic like sponges. And I really
Mhm.
like that concept. And I really like that episode. It's also the episode where Harvey realizes Sabrina's a witch, I think, or that comes a couple episodes later, because like of how
Oh,
much magic he's been
yeah.
showered with over the
Oh,
years.
no, it's not the same one. It's different episodes. It's I think the Willowcraft episode was middle of the season, and then the Harvey one sort of came up right at the end. I think it
Yeah.
was the end of season 4. It was just before Sabrina went to college, so I
That
think
it
it was.
that
So,
is the
and
second time that Harvey Kinkle had to cross something in mortal peril that had to do with fire. Because that was also the obstacle course episode, if I remember correctly. Because Josh and Harvey have to run like an
yes,
obstacle course. And this was there was a season episode, the True Love episode, where Sabrina has to cross like fire to get to him, and it's like a leap of faith fake fire thing. The other realm was very big on obstacle courses to prove your love, which I find very strange, but hilarious at the same time.
and I suppose in a sense you could see the whole thing about how much magic can give to mortals and stuff like that. It's almost a metaphor in itself for how many half truths and diversions can you get away with to stop someone finding out the truth about something before it really becomes too much. Um, I suppose that is a bit of a stretch on my part to make such a
No,
connection,
I think
but
there's a community aspect to Sabrina. It's not quite found family in the way that the Golden Girls was, because the Golden Girls was very much a found family thing, even
yeah.
between Dorothy and Sophia, even though they were blood related. They still learned
Mhm.
so much about each other throughout the course of the show.
Oh yes.
Sabrina has a community aspect to it. Episode
Mhm.
like because high school is an easy trope to use, which was like Lee used it for so long. You're creating Sabrina chooses and creates the world in which she lived, and when it's out of her control is when things get really bad. So like
Yes.
when she's working at the office and she can't control their perception of her, and she still just can't seem to get out of that kind of college mindset and really start embracing quote unquote the real world after college. Um, it's one of those things where it really is about how Sabrina chose to create community and how insular her world was. Because when she does things like when she was working at the coffee shop and they do a
Mhm.
Valentine's Day episode, Miles has better luck with women just because he's not Sabrina. So he's like out there in the world more and he's just met more people on average, it feels like.
Mm. And that is something I quite like about Sabrina, showing her development, her maturing, and the changes that she goes through year on year. Because at first they do a really good job at showing how utterly clueless she is with this secret she now has to keep to herself, and the chaos that ensures throughout season one. She still gets into like lots of trouble as the seasons go on, and she does still have to turn for help. But I would say that's a very normal thing. Just because you're becoming more self dependent and independent doesn't mean that there isn't situations where you'll need assistance
Yeah.
to solve your issues. And that what you were saying about found family, I agree. Not like the Golden Girls. I would rather say Sabrina has her immediate family and then has her friends who are outside of the family. So it's more Sabrina's found family and friends, because the found family concept, they all interact with each other. And no offense to Harvey and the ants, but they were friendly with him, but he always felt very much, oh, it's Sabrina's friend. Oh, it's
Yeah.
Sabrina's boyfriend. Not necessarily a full part of the
Yeah.
family, or at
I
least not.
actually really like that too, because I think
Mm,
that's actually really true to life in a lot of ways.
mm.
The idea that they're not humoring Harvey, they don't hate Harvey, they're not like
Oh
talking about
no,
him behind
not
his
at
back
all.
by any means, but the idea of like they keep that. So this is my kind of distinction between Hilda and Zelda versus Morgan and Roxy. Is that
Mm,
Morgan and Roxy aren't really there to give sage advice. They don't have that distinction of kind of being aloof. They're very involved in Sabrina's world, center of Sabrina's world, as kind of the new BFFs. Where Hilda
mm,
and Zelda had that really great parent role, and they could
mm,
dispense advice, but they also had their really own great exterior lives, abject of Sabrina, that we don't really get from Roxy and Morgan. Roxy and Morgan's worlds, in a lot of ways, are tied in with Sabrina. I couldn't even tell you what job Morgan had. I can tell you what Hilda did for work, and I
mm,
could tell you about adventures she had on the show Abject of Sabrina. But
mm,
I can't actually picture Morgan as her own character. And so
mm,
for me, when in the last season where Hilda and Zelda are no longer on the show at all, except for in the final episode, um, I can't picture Roxy and Morgan without Sabrina in the way that I can picture Zelda and Hilda without
mm.
Sabrina. Um,
They they don't come across as fully fleshed out characters
yeah,
in their own right. I was going to make a comment about the fact that the show did feel as if it was moving towards Sabrina. What I mentioned before about Sabrina becoming self-dependent, independent. It's Sabrina finding her own 2 feet and forming, in a sense, her own world, her own connections and such. And I suppose Sabrina's housemates and such are a good example of this. But then, as you say, then again, at times it sort of feels that they're there in a supportive role to Sabrina as I'm not sure how to put it.
well, life was changing around her, and she was going to make it hers. I mean, it's right there in the theme song lyrics of the last couple of years.
Mm,
I will say the one thing they did that I really liked, that the Full House sequel did this and it bothered me, but I liked it on Sabrina, was when they made Fuller House, they kept the house in San Francisco for that whole family instead of selling it and then buying something that could accommodate them. Whereas in Sabrina, when she just moved back in, it was fine because we weren't in the middle of this big thing with housing then. So it wasn't a big deal to just go back to that first set and instead of finding a new home, which is something that bugged me about Fuller House, was just how much money they could have gotten for that like 4 bedroom with an attic on a hill in San Fran.
mm. Indeed. And the fact is, like, Sabrina's ants have magic. They could just conjure an exact replica of the house. In fact, they did do that in the past when they had the separation episode, which we'll get to as part of the touching on the discussion about the ants
Yeah,
and how great they are. But yeah, they could literally just give her the house. And Oh, there's so many things one could do with all that magic.
Well,
And
and the room was perfect. Like she lived in that room, except for the year where she's at college. Essentially, that was her bedroom for, how many years? For 97, 2003. This is
oh,
something that they share with Clarissa, actually, that I talked about in the last episode, I
mm,
think, is the is that bedroom and the iconography and the creation of that bedroom as more important than its space as architecture. So like the thoughtful process. So that's why whenever I talk about Sabrina, I always think of Clarissa, because really Sabrina and Clarissa are the continuation of a very similar character for Melissa about a young woman becoming more of a woman and making choices and learning life lessons, except that Clarissa, instead of having magic, had a rudimentary like thing about creating platform computer games in the very early 90s instead of having magic.
oh. So she was the primitive form of the YouTube streamer gamer.
Probably would have been if the Clarissa reboot ever got off the ground, and I know Melissa has been trying to do this for a couple years now, actually, I think. Um, if they ever got the Clarissa reboot off the ground, I could easily see her doing either a YouTube stream or a Twitch stream or something, because her big way to solve issues and talk to things with herself was to do video
Yeah.
game creation. Essentially, it was one of her big personality traits that they really glommed onto.
They'll do a Raven's Home thing on it. It'll be Clarissa, the next generation. She'd passed her skills on to her daughter, and her daughter will be doing it. But Clarissa have a mature,
Yeah.
objective standpoint on it now, so that will sort of change up their dynamic
Well,
if they do that way.
in the animated Sabrina show, Sabrina voices Hilda and Zelda, and then I think her younger sister Emily actually voices Sabrina herself in that animated show,
Hmm.
um, which is kind of cool. We can also talk about when we talk about maturing, we can actually talk about Amanda, her cousin, who goes through a maturing arc, kind of behind the scenes of the show, and
Hmm.
in the 3 or 4 episodes she's in. Um, and the last episode she's in, not the finale, but the episode centered around her, was actually supposed to be a backdoor pilot for a show where it was going to be
Hmm.
Amanda the teenage witch. And so at the point where Sabrina is, I think that was the name of her cousin. I want to say it was Amanda. But at the point where Melissa Joan Hart kind of knew where her show was going because she was producing on it at that point, I don't think her mom was anymore. Um, they had this character of Amanda who starts out as this really, really precocious. I think she was a full witch kind of brat. And then we have a babysitting episode where she shows that she's kind of falling for Harvey, like that very puppy love thing. And then the
Yes.
next episode is about Sabrina arguing to try to get her into this special magic academy. And then that was going to become its own show in like the Sabrina universe as a continuation of Sabrina, and basically give a way to reboot going back to when Sabrina was 16, whereas Sabrina
Hmm.
was now 2021 at that point, I think. So, yeah.
How interesting. Hmm. It's great when you find out these little facts that you didn't really notice before.
I'm glad
Uh,
that you like it, because other people are like, God, if I had to take a shot for every time John said something I didn't know, that I don't understand the reference. No, but that was a big thing, is
um,
that Amanda was the reason Amanda, I think, is so present in the finale, bring Harvey and Sabrina together, isn't just because she's young and believes in true love, which obviously Harvey and Sabrina have, but it's
hmm.
also because I think it was probably an apology that she didn't get her own show like she was supposed to get. It was supposed to basically, when Chilling Adventures of Sabrina does the thing where she ends up at the Magic Academy, I always think of Amanda and the Sabrina the Teenage Witch 96 Magic Academy she was going to get into. That never happened. So
Oh, it wasn't the same one that the Charm sisters were in, was it?
I don't think
Well,
so.
that's
It
little
was one
Jeff.
of those things where I think Charm, because what's really interesting about these witch shows in the same time period is they all take place in different universes with a different concept of what witching is and what it means.
Hmm.
So you've got the Buffy witch, you've got the Charmed witch, and you've got Sabrina, the teenage witch, and they all approach having powers differently.
Mm.
And I really kind of like that they each had a really clear distinction. In the 90s, you could choose what kind of witch you wanted to follow. It was great. It was everything you need.
It was a bonanza for
It was
gay
a
boys everywhere.
bonanza of witches. Yep.
Yeah. You want nice, wholesome witchiness, you go to Sabrina. You want more edgy, fighting demons, kicking ass witches, then you've got have your choice between vampires with Buffy or demons with Charmed.
And Charmed
Um,
had that kind of sisterhood, but also true love. So Charmed was
mm,
kind of going in that Sandra Bullock rom-com practical magic direction too. So you could
mm,
also choose if you were really into horror movies, you could go with Buffy, and then
mm.
if you were really into romance, you could do you could do Leo and whichever sister Leo married. I can never remember.
Piper.
Whichever way, yeah,
It was
Piper
Piper.
and Leo. I just remember that was the first time I saw Julian McMahon, and then when he was in Fantastic Four,
War.
and then when he was in Nip Tuck, I was like, oh, I followed him since Charmed. It's nice.
Oh, Doctor Doom Daddy.
Oh my god! When we talk about Fantastic Four 2005,
Oh,
because we
we
have to
should.
at some point.
Oh, we'll have to talk about that. We'll have to talk about how the MCU is retroactively adding all of the previous Marvel movies
Oh
now.
my god, Chris Evans
Season
is never going
ending.
to be able to escape Marvel. Poor Chris Evans. I know he wants to do other things.
Yeah. Well, he will try. He will
Yeah.
try. I wanted to quickly add about going back to the maturity aspect of the conversation. Um, so you can kind of see why Sabrina was really popular for young gay boys back in the 90s.
Yeah.
For the fact that I think it wasn't just the fact that a lot of her struggles were you could empathize with quite closely. I think for a lot of boys, Sabrina also was a bit of a friend, if that made sense. You know, she was bubbly, enthusiastic. She was the kind of girl that you wanted to be have as your friend at high school. And even though it was a character on television, I think a lot of people would take comfort from such an example because she was fun, but she was also studious and
Well, and she also was imperfect. Like the idea of she
yes,
wanted to be studious and she tried, but like in the episode where she's babysitting when she and Harvey do that mitosis is skit during parents night, and they're like, we're gonna study, and someone goes, oh, I'm hungry. Like she tried even if she didn't succeed at it, like she wanted to
Mhm.
do it. And the episode where she takes on too much and she's got like 10 projects at once, that's very real. Getting
Mhm.
back to the idea of Sabrina as an LGBT analog, the idea of Sabrina and queerness. Um, when I think about the 90s, on 90s sitcoms especially, there were two episodes they did that every 90s sitcom did. They did the addiction episode and they did the cult episode. And so in
Oh,
Sabrina, in the cult episode where there's an actual cult where Miles joins a cult and like Sabrina gets pissed off because he gives them the telescope he'd been saving all the money for. There's this great moment of her not just embracing witch heritage, but fighting back against people that claim they're witches, but aren't,
mhm.
that are being heretics, that are taking something really precious, something she's fought to understand, something she's come peace with,
Mm.
and the big moment where like she's like, and I'm gonna put a fireball in your face if you don't stop saying you're a witch, kind of thing. I think is a really great way outside of romance and outside of coming of age that Sabrina really learns to inherit herself and inherit her place in the world. And it's not perfect. She still has a lot she's going through. We still
Yes.
have 2 seasons left of the show. But I was thinking about that episode. I wanted to talk about it just as a cult episode almost, because every show had a cult episode, which is kind of a weird thing. We were fascinated with cults in the 90s. Like, I can't tell you, it was like a big
Dare,
thing.
God, dare I say, aren't we still? I mean,
Yeah,
if you want some typical villain group, make them a cult.
make them a cult. Yeah, but it's also, when you think about it in the context of how Sabrina interacts with her magic and how
Mm.
the end of almost every season, the first 3 years was choosing between magic and blank, choosing between talking with her mom and having magic, choosing
Yes.
between Harvey and magic, and making that choice. And in this episode where she is confronted with someone pretending to be what she is and using that
Mm,
pretense to grift, using it in a negative connotation, using it to have power over people, um, in a way that isn't good, and in a way where I can honestly see if he had been a real witch, the other realm would have been like, and we're turning you into a cat with their special axe that looks like a cat head, because the other realm is nothing if not symbolic. And I just really loved how Sabrina didn't just defend Miles, but she was also like, I am this, and you are not, and you are making this into something it's never supposed to be. And so now
mhm,
I'm going to fight for the thing that I am. And I really love that as a queer analog.
mm.
In a lot of ways. Also, it's just a really great episode because like she turns into a tiger, I think, at some point, to prove that she's like a witch to the guy because he's like, you
Ooh.
can't be a witch. They're not
Uh,
a real thing.
How, how very animorphs.
Oh, very animorphs. Oh God.
Yeah, that's
They've redone the
all.
coverage of them, so now they're not like in the stages of it. They're like holographs, and as you like turn the cover or walk past them in the grocery store, like they change from people to animals, and it's somehow more disconcerting than it was in the first set of books where it's just like progression and static.
Um, and actually, picking up what you were just saying about that cult episode, I think we mentioned it in the previous podcast. Even earlier, back in season one, the episode where they go to the Puritan village and they have to be Puritans for
Great
the day.
episode. It's one of those lesser known great episodes.
Hmm. And that sort of that what you say reminds me of that because I think that was when she was really struggling with her identity. And even though she if she hadn't although she might not have fully accepted it at that point, it was a great lesson her aunts were teaching her to stick it out and stick through like the supposed ridicule and shame that
And I don't know how far Greendale is from Salem, but they got in a car and drove the entire way just to tell her that they were not going to pick her up and
oh
take her home. I
it
don't
was
know how
probably
far it
a
is, but
oh no. It's probably a magic car. They probably
okay,
flew through the sky like Harry Potter.
I just have this vision of them on a road trip, and she's just like looking at her watch because they didn't have big cell phones back then, and just like, where are they? I just want to go home. And then them rolling up, being like, no, we're not taking you home. You have to learn this. This is
Oh,
your heritage. This is just who you are. You have to learn how to deal with this. And it's what's really great about that episode is that there's kind of a classical structure to that episode. It's very much like The Crucible in a way. You have a very classic three acts, kind of the mystery is set up. Libby does what Libby does, where she spreads rumors and she's vicious. And then Sabrina has to deal with the truth and with the fallout. And even though Sabrina's not the one that's accused of being a witch, it's very much Sabrina learning how to
mm,
talk about something very important to her in a very real way. Um,
mm.
and also, it's good for journalism majors to learn rhetoric and public speaking. So take debate, y'all, if you can.
Oh, that actually made me think of a point. Actually, we'll go right back to what you mentioned about addiction, the addiction episode in a second. Um, so
Pancakes! Oh my God, pancakes!
cover
Sorry,
me in
it's great. It's
batter
a
and
great
maple syrup.
addiction. It's the weirdest and best addiction problem to have, and it comes out of nowhere, and it's never mentioned again.
We should actually look through the episodes after that and before that and see if they eat pancakes at any point, just to prove
I think
that
the only
it's not
time
an
that it
issue.
would come up would be the first episode in college, when she makes breakfast for her roommates. There
Yes,
may be pancakes in that. I didn't like look closely at the breakfast she made, but it
I
was all there, so
really,
it's very possible it was
I'm
there.
fairly sure, and she did actually thinking
So
about it. But
also,
maybe I'm just
pancakes are
driving
the
her
worst
crazy.
breakfast food. They're not French toast, but that's my personal like. It's weird that pancakes are the addiction thing. I find it very strange.
Thinking about that, if I ever pop over to the States for a visit, you're going to take me to Denny's, aren't you? for the
I mean,
authentic
I
experience.
have one like 2.5 blocks away. Like I can get there and like
Ooh.
I can do like an online order and 15 minutes later just walk right over and get my Denny's, get my moons over my hammy and my fries and my French toast, and that's all you need. You're ready to go.
Uh, we'll have to. Oh, I want to do the full-on experience, sir. I want to sit in a Denny's. I want to look around and wonder
I
and
should
eat
take
the.
you to the Denny's next to Disneyland, where it's Denny's, but it also has the avarice of the mouse because they sell Disney products like a gift shop at Denny's. It's like a whole
It's like
thing.
so they have mouse-shaped pancakes then.
No, I wish they did. That would be really neat. But no, you can buy like
That would be
stuffed
awesome.
animals and keychains, and they're themed to the park, not to Denny's. It's
Oh,
weird. It's great. I don't know how to
piffle.
explain it. It's
Um,
so America is what it is.
oh, piffle. I'm not going into Denny's to go and buy merchandise for God's sakes. I'm going in there to have a heart attack.
Um, yep, that's
No.
Denny's all right.
Um, so the point I was just going to make was, so I recall an episode where um, I'm not sure where it was. Libby was either out of the equation fully, or because Libby was away, and all of a sudden, one of the cheerleaders went up to Sabrina and said to her, "Oh, you're so nice, Sabrina. You're so cool. Oh, we're sorry that we don't tell you about this more often, but you know what with Libby and everything."
Oh, this is the Sunspot episode where there's molecular instability and Sabrina and Libby switch personalities. This is the one where she tries to take over the world, I think, is this
Oh,
episode.
yes. So she starts being a bit mean at that point.
Yeah. And
But
then Salem talks her almost right away into world domination with Sabrina as Libby. Um,
that's great.
yeah.
Uh, Great episode. That was such a great episode. That I think that's the one with the alleged capped executioner you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, with the
She was
axe,
actually
like a
painted.
full-on executioner
Yes.
outfit, and then like the axe is like it's got a cat handle. It's like a cat axe. I don't know how to explain it. That's what it is. And
Yeah.
the one of the judges from Boston Legal plays the other realm. I don't know if he's like the head of the other realm at that point, like if Penn just didn't want to come back, or if he's just like the judge that decides that people have been evil enough.
And to be
Um,
capped.
yeah, meant to turn into cats. But yeah, so it's really that's a really great it's a really
Mm.
great Libby episode because you get like because then Libby goes off the deep end and she turns into like this version of Sabrina that is a marshmallow that isn't the Sabrina that I
Uh,
think of when I think of Sabrina, but Libby goes like full on like past Sabrina into like the way too sweet direction.
Almost Virgin Mary.
Like she's making like an apple brown Betty, and I'm just like, who makes apple brown Betty at 2 in the afternoon? What is this?
But the thing is, that cheerleader's confession to Sabrina, even though she's being mean at the moment, it's sincere because that's obviously that person's opinion. Um, and that's probably how a lot of the other people feel. And the reason I bring it up is it's actually a great analogy for when you have a bully and you're a really nice, sweet young gay boy. There might be people that love you and like you and might even want to be your friends. But when you have a bully that's picking on you, it then becomes hard for some people to show their true feelings. They shouldn't allow that to influence their decision making. Like, but unfortunately, it's something that's very real, and I think that's why that moment's always stuck with me because I think that's a great example, a subtle example of some people's experiences in high school and
And what's
such.
really interesting is that Libby is the only true bully of Sabrina. Like I said last episode, kind of glibly, the idea of Sabrina as the only villain in Sabrina. But even the people that are mean to Sabrina, that are bad, even people like Brad, often she shows them to be buffoons, either through use of magic or as that final laugh of the show. Like Willard Crafts, Brad in some cases. There's the idea that um, there's the idea that she doesn't really have enemies besides herself. Like all the bad things that happen are Sabrina either not paying attention or losing control of a situation. Even in the season where she's either interning or she works at the newspaper, and the people on staff just don't like her for whatever reason. They're not overly mean to her. They get worried about her in the one episode where they think she's insane and homeless, which is not a great episode if we're looking at longevity of episodes, not one of the better ones. Uh, but like even within that, they are not outwardly mean. Even like when we first meet Morgan, because Morgan, when we originally met her, she was the RA in college. Um, she really didn't take things seriously, and she was supposed to become Hilda, and it really didn't work out because they weren't close enough in character to really be a Hilda analog. Um, like even when she's like passive aggressively mean to Sabrina, she's never like full on bully, except for Libby and maybe in some cases Willard Craft. There's not really a bully aspect to the show after they lose Libby, and even some
No,
episodes with
yes.
Libby, she's not really even the main bully.
No, no, true, true. No, you're right. You're completely right. Libby's antagonism of Sabrina is personal, and I think it's the only one that's really personal.
Well, you know what it
Lib,
is? I figured out why because I watched the pilot again with my friend. And the
yeah,
reason Libby gets mad at her is because Sabrina unknowingly reads her mind and spills a secret about a boy that she was wearing the aftershave of. So she reveals a vulnerability that Libby can't have people know about. Like she
uh,
basically reveals that Libby was Sandy in kind of a Summer Love and Grease analog. And it's from that moment that Libby targets her. So really,
mm,
it's kind of like Sabrina doesn't cause it to happen, but I always wonder what the series would have looked like if Sabrina hadn't wandered into that bathroom to wash her hands and
mm,
hadn't unknowingly used her
threatened.
magic to spill threaten Libby's social
But yeah,
position by being honest.
mm,
I'm not
yes,
saying Libby is not culpable because Libby did not do some good things throughout the series, like, but there's also not it's not just it's not Dave Karofsky in Glee where one day all of a sudden he's there and he's the bully. Like there's kind of a solid reason behind it. Not that it's good, but there is kind of a reason there. And if you want to go with like sapphic overtones, you can also go on. Maybe they develop crushes on each other in small ways. I don't know, but I think you might be reading a little bit more into it than you necessarily need to if you go that way.
I don't think it's reading too much into saying that. I think Libby felt threatened by Sabrina because of the fact that Sabrina was so good in a lot of things that she did, and technically Sabrina. If Libby wasn't around, I think Sabrina would have been the most popular girl in school and would likely have been Queen Bee and everything, but not in a cheerleader sort of way. And I think Libby realized that potential and she felt so threatened. That's why she constantly put Sabrina down.
When you look
And
at the Halloween episodes, we see that in the first two Halloween episodes. So the first one, where Libby convinces doppelganger Sabrina to streak, and
yeah,
so it's one of those things where Libby really just wants to be in charge, and Sabrina's a person she can't be in charge of because Sabrina has so many other things going on. She doesn't have time for it. Um, but the Halloween episode that's kind of the homage to Pee Wee Herman, where the furniture comes to life and talks,
yes,
and they get They Might Be Giants, which is one of Melissa Joan Hart's favorite bands, by the way, I guess. Um, it's one of those things where I can totally see Sabrina having the power to pull Westbridge. It's Westbridge, right? Yeah, to pull the high
yeah,
school in a really positive direction, because that is at the end of the day ultimately Sabrina's personality is one that is very positive, and though manic at times, does want to believe the best. And she has a very
yeah.
interesting life. Like
Oh,
her mother is an archaeologist in Peru. I don't think we talk about that enough when we talk about Sabrina, but like her mother's an archaeologist, her aunt is a classically trained musician,
mm,
her other aunt is a physicist,
yes.
her father lives in Paris. I mean,
And
like,
and technically he's a diplomat.
yeah, I mean
Um,
that's the dream. Like
yeah,
Willem Kraft should have been kissing her feet every single day. I'm just saying it's
yeah.
bad planning.
Oh,
Bad
yes.
planning.
We when we're talking, that reminds me. So we were talking about Libby. So Libby feels very personal. The other villains, so to speak, the other antagonists, it's different. Willard Craft just hates teenagers.
Well, he
I
hates
don't know.
abnormality. Like he has this very weird kind of pseudo American capitalist patriotism fetish. And you don't
Yeah.
really see it right away, but like even in episodes where they kind of infantilize him because of what happens with magic, like with his ex-wife,
Mm,
or when Sabrina as Libby has his pants fall down in the hallway to make fun of him. Even when they infantilize him, like his base thing is about the idea of normality and regimentation without give. And because Sabrina's life is really a life um, about bending rules in a way because of how she is as a witch.
mm,
Um, I think it's one of those things too that there might have been some witch hunter gene in Willard Craft. It's very possible because I feel like
mm,
Brad grows closer to Sabrina even though he's a witch hunter, and I think the people that are villainous to Sabrina have that thing where they kind of feel a call that there are parts of Sabrina that they really resonate with
mm.
because Brad really likes Harvey. Like he may not like Sabrina, he stands Sabrina, but there's nothing to tell me that Brad is hanging out with Harvey to make fun of him or to steal his
No,
position on the football
no.
team. I think they genuinely like each other.
I,
Um,
oh yes, that just definitely comes across, and actually, that's very natural to actually show a relationship where you know your boyfriend's good friend doesn't like you, and it is shown, and he doesn't particularly like you, but he's not going to antagonize you
yeah.
for no reason. It's just like your personalities are different, so you don't naturally get along or hang out. And I think that was actually something quite good for them to show, even though Brad and what's her name, Sabrina's friend during that season, who's her apprentice, but
The
is not
name
really
of her name is
apprenticing.
Dreama. They
Dreamer, that's it.
the
That
poor girl whose name is Dreama in the mortal world. Like they should have. Why would you? I have feelings
that
about Dreama. Like I have a feeling about the whole. It's a very Buffy Kendra moment where it's like I have so many feelings about it. So
they brought them in for that season,
yeah.
which I think was season 4. They were massively underused. Dreamer didn't really have any personality besides being Sabrina's replacement friend.
Well,
Um,
also it's like Sabrina wasn't the best user of magic canonically. Like people on the Witches Council had to deal with her and her family, and especially Sabrina. Like, and I keep thinking Sabrina openly asked, "Why are they giving me someone? Like, why me?" And her answer were just like, "That's just the way it is. It's like witch jury duty." And I'm like, "No, but seriously, why her? Wasn't there a conversation?"
I I bet you, if you were to if you were like to look into the details of it, you could be a fly on the Witches' Council wall. They would say, "Oh, we decided to set up a test for this new witch and see how
Yeah.
she does with a little responsibility."
Or they're
That
just
was
like, "This will be hilarious. Let's just watch this happen."
it.
Um,
It's totally not meant to be this analogy, but actually, you could almost look at Sabrina becoming a mentor figure to Dreamer as akin to an older gay boy or older gay girl in school, and all of a sudden you meet a younger sort of member of the community that sort of looks up to you, and then it's like, "Oh, I want to know what you know," like, and you're like, "But I don't really know anything still, and I'm very inexperienced, but I'll tell you what I know." I
I
know it's about to
do
come across like that, but
I do often wonder if because really of all of the main characters of Sabrina, we only have really four actors of color. So
hmm,
in the second episode of the first season, at least on Hulu, and I don't know if this is the correct order, I don't think it is. We have the lady that teaches her about the bun cakes with the true sprinkles, but we really don't get a recurring person of color role in Sabrina until Quizmaster. And then you get,
Yes.
after Quizmaster is gone, then you get Dreama and you have Brad.
Yes.
And I think there might have been a person of color working in her office, but
There
I do
and
wonder how much of it was about bringing people of color onto the show.
there was there was also like a co-worker at the cafe that appeared in a
Oh
couple of
yeah.
episodes,
Oh,
but
her name was she has a name,
she
obviously.
she was weird. She appeared out of nowhere. They didn't introduce her, but all of a sudden she was talking to
Yeah.
Sabrina as a supporting character.
So she
It,
works in the coffee shop. She's in the Love episode, is one of her
yeah,
biggest episodes.
it was just a bit bizarre that all of a sudden like Sabrina was having this like actual conversation with her that was more than just like a passing hello with one of the extras sort of thing. I've got some information actually about people of, like a person of color for Sabrina. So from what I've read into the background, um, for season 1, they actually originally intended to cast an actress of color to be Sabrina's best friend. And this is what they were trying to proceed with. And then the network said, unfortunately, we can't really do that. I know that sounds all sorts of horrific horribleness.
I mean, it was it was
They,
96, 97 at that point, so I'm
yeah.
less surprised than you,
Mm.
honestly.
Yeah, I'm seeing it from my modern perceptions, but
Yeah.
so that was what was originally intended. But then they went and cast Jenny, Sabrina's lovely curly-haired friend from season 1, who I love. She was really great,
She's
but
like your anti-Val because you absolutely like.
we're going into that, yeah.
Yeah.
I was leading to that.
You have to get it. You have to get it out of your system while we're able to, because I feel
yeah,
like
yes.
you have some things to unburden yourself with.
Um, well, yes, I think we should wrap up the conversation, the podcast, with discussing maybe Sabrina's aunts and such, because they deserve some spotlight.
Sure.
But before that, I will get this out of my system, um, just so everyone can have a giggle. So yes, during seasons 2 and 3, Sabrina's best friend was Val, but Val was a complete bitch. And the reason she's a complete bitch is, now this is from me having rewatched all the episodes and coming up with plenty of proof about this. Val was very much a best friend in name only. In none of the episodes she ever went out of her way to do anything really for Sabrina. Oh, she had lunch with her. She went to like concerts and stuff with her, but she never lent Sabrina anything. She never did a favor for Sabrina. In fact, Val was always asking for things from Sabrina, or asking, "Can I borrow your car? Oh, can you really do this for me?" Val would get Sabrina in trouble with things, like when she said, "Hey everyone, Sabrina's having a Halloween party at her place," and Sabrina was like, "What? I'm not having a Halloween party." But Val threw her into it, and Val volunteered her for this, that, the other. The thing is that, and there were some episodes as well where when Val had the chance to be more popular or to be a cheerleader, um, she sort of went for it, and you could tell that if Libby had accepted Val, Val would have been Libby's eager follow on. But unfortunately, in this case, Sabrina got there first. The only time that Val really stood up for Sabrina was during that episode when she discovered that Sabrina was a witch, and she took um, Sabrina's side when Libby was trying to coerce her to the side of evil, sort of thing. But I know she did out of friendship, but I can't help but wonder, because she still had her memories of Sabrina as a witch, how much of that was influenced by the fact that, oh, I've got a cool witch friend. Awesome, sort of thing. So this is why I don't despise Val, but I don't see her as an actual friend of Sabrina.
So there's something interesting about Val and taking the place of Jenny.
Yeah.
So the idea is that when Jenny meets Sabrina, Jenny was the new girl at school the year before Sabrina, and Sabrina is new. So Jenny befriends Sabrina, and Jenny has this great exterior life. I can easily see if Jenny had continued on the show, doing more Earth-centric episodes, maybe doing a Lilith Fair episode even. Um, the episode where they're all stuck in the 60s, for good or for ill, I feel like Jenny would have really thrived in that episode. Um, I think the idea in writing Val was to write someone that Sabrina could be more confident than, to show Sabrina's growth. But in doing that, they have to create a character that is so contained and so neurotic that they actually make her unlikable to some. And what's interesting when you point to the cheerleading episode, on the Hulu description, it actually makes Sabrina seem like the bad guy for not letting Val go out for cheerleading. Like in the description of it, it makes it seem like it's Sabrina's fault. And I don't remember the episode because I didn't watch it. Um, but it's kind of an interesting thing of how they wrote characters that were less confident than Sabrina to give Sabrina someone to talk to, except for, and I did this research too. So the name of the character that is the barista that is her friend in Bean There, Brewed That is the name of the coffee house, by the way. Her name is Marnie, which I wonder if that's a nod to Halloween Town. And she is played by, oh, by the way, horribly enough, the Sabrina Wikipedia calls her incredibly nosy, and that's like her one attribute, and I don't think that's fair. Marnie's two big episodes were a Valentine episode and a Halloween episode, actually.
Mm.
Also, I did not realize this because I had never thought about it. Josh's last name is Blackheart. I did not
Ooh,
realize they had made his last name because he's not. He's very kind. It's kind of weird to name your guy post Harvey Kinkle Blackheart. Like it's
that
almost like they wanted him to be a witch hunter or
or a
something.
warm
They just
up.
couldn't commit to it.
Black
Also,
card
being there,
line
brewed that. What a name for a coffee shop! Like I can't even imagine the conversation about that. It's very Bob's Burgers in a way. It's very fun
Mm.
name. Um,
Yeah. So yes, I've cleansed my heart of
cleanse your.
Val.
I
Talk
so
about. Sorry.
I have to cleanse my heart a little bit before we talk about the ants. Actually, then. So
Yeah.
I did some digging this morning, and I got behind as many firewalls as I could because it's really hard to find actor interviews that aren't behind firewalls. And so I actually looked at Melissa Joan Hart's IMDb page to see what she had done with God's Not Dead. And I looked at what she had said about her work on Sabrina and her work on God's Not Dead. And I looked a little bit at her history. So she's Catholic, which I found really interesting. Like she had gone through confirmation. Um, and so she talks in playing a character in God's Not Dead, and for some reason, I thought she was an executive producer, and I guess she wasn't. But she was a main character in God's Not Dead too. And it's a not a great movie. It's a Christian fever dream. I feel the same way about God's Not Dead and Melissa Joan Hart as I do about Brett Dalton playing Jesus in that Christian movie that he did, where he played like an actor that had like an addiction, and he ends up getting cast as Jesus, and through that he finds Jesus. And I have so many feelings about it, so many. Um, that's neither here nor there. But so apparently, Melissa Joan Hart's faith meant a great deal to her. So she doesn't see God's Not Dead as this weird evangelical fervor mouthpiece. She sees it as the coin flip to playing Sabrina. Like, so apparently when she played Sabrina, she got a lot of ire from the Christian community for playing a witch. And so when she conceptualized doing Christian films, doing Christmas movies with a Jesus-y message, um, she always talks about it as being the other side of the coin to playing Sabrina, is to then getting to do these faith movies that are very important to her. And so it's not quite as malevolent as I originally thought it was. I still feel like you can't really do God's Not Dead, the film franchise, and then go into this big, we're celebrating 25 years of Sabrina thing. Like, it does
Mm,
feel, I know what she said about it as much as I could
yes.
see, and the idea of this just being the other side of the coin, but it still does. I mean, not to
It-
say Sabrina was so dark and edgy and witchy
no, no.
until Chilling Adventures, but like, there's still a part of me that's like,
Yeah.
no, but you definitely played. She didn't just play a witch character on Sabrina. She cameoed as Sabrina in other shows.
Yes.
She played
It,
Sabrina in 7
mm,
different venues.
yeah,
Um,
she wasn't she? Didn't she have mention it in what was it? Melissa and Joe? Was that her recent
her
sitcom?
her
And
sitcom,
they did a Halloween special about it, didn't they?
yeah. But she's played Sabrina Spellman. She did walk on guest roles on several different other TV shows and on one game show as Sabrina. In fact, she did a Maxim shoot as Sabrina, and the Archie folks got really pissed because she did it as Sabrina, not Melissa, and they wanted to protect their character. And she almost lost the rights to Sabrina, it seems like, from doing the Maxim shoot.
Wow.
And for me, it's just like I have a lot of trouble because no other character in the cast has made those kind of moves. And she's friends with Salem Fry and Elisa Donovan, but she's also
Yeah.
friends with Candace Cameron Bure, known Christianist and brother to and sister to Kurt Cameron, known Christianist. And so for me, it's like I don't really know how she can embrace both those things. I think she talked herself into the two side of the coin things. I don't know her
Mhm.
personally.
Uh,
I don't want hate mail. I don't want Melissa Joan Hart to hate me because I would like to be friends with Melissa possibly, but like it's also just
it-
you can't it's kind of like Brett Dalton playing a down and out actor that finds Jesus in a Jesus movie. Whenever I see Brett Dalton in the Shield show, I'm going to think about him playing that role and wondering just how much of a Chris Pratt type he is and how much he's really trying to like I can't not think of it now and it's a thing.
yeah. It almost sounds as if it's worded like almost like penance. I've done this stuff before. Now I will do certain other things to make up for it. I agree. It's not really a way to equivalate it, but that almost sounds like that. Um, and then you have the other side of the coin with Hilda and Zelda's uh, actresses that
Yeah.
I think they've embraced their legacy on the show without sort of quantifying it
By
in
the way,
any.
if you like Carolyn Reyes and Hilda, Carolyn Ray did a comedy show in Canada where she got
Yes.
trapped in a house with 10 other comedians and it was like the last person standing wins 100,000 for charity or something like that. I loved Carolyn Ray and I was so glad to see her play Hilda.
Indeed. Um, I shall have to pop off shortly, sir.
Okay.
So shall we move to the next part of the discussion?
Yes, let's do quickly. Let's talk about the ants because I know that means a great deal to you. So
It does, because I don't think Sabrina would have been the show, the character as well, but the show, I don't think it would have been anything without them. We talk about Sabrina as the central character. We talk about the fabulousness of Salem, who is just such a breakout character in his own right. But the ants themselves, they sort of ground the rest of the cast. They're like the stable anchor, the home life, which everything else revolves around. Yes, they have their own zany, wacky adventures and such, um, but they really do add something by just always sort of being there for Sabrina and trying to guide her on the right path. Um, and this is why there's such a great analogy to my mindset of um, a devoted lesbian couple. I know they're sisters. I know they're Sabrina's aunts and everything. But I mean, sometimes if you just forget about that familial relationship, it really does come across as two women raising a teenager and trying to help guide her through life and everything. And I mean, it's not like they haven't supported this analogy that realistically they're married, because they do their taxes together. They complain about all the centuries they've been together, and like they bring up each other's past mistakes and such. Hell, they even had that separation episode where they ended up having the same house just flipped backwards, sort of thing. um I think they tried to counter that a little bit by having the romantic relationships, as you mentioned before, like David, David Crockett and the whole
Daniel
war.
Boone.
Bang, Daniel
Because
Boone.
that's in the show. When someone calls him Davy Crockett, he gets so angry he starts shouting, "I'm Daniel Boone" all the time, which is great. I think I'm just
Mm.
going to start shouting that at people just to see how they react.
And they had that weird thing where they were fighting over Willard Craft, which is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life.
Well, to be fair, when you're parents of a child, your life revolves around the child. So, like, it wasn't that they just didn't have time. In the first season, there's a subplot about Zelda's mailman being in love with Zelda, but they never show the mailman. It never goes anywhere. Um, I love how imperfect they were. Actually, I think if they had gone a more traditional route where they were more like Endora from Bewitched, or even if
Yeah.
they were more like and Hilda and Zelda from the TV movie that preceded the show. And I don't
Mm.
actually remember what those ants were like, but I feel like there was a really concerted effort, especially once they had cast Beth Broderick and Carolyn Ray, to
Mm.
make them really whole characters, because you have to kind of offset the amount of magic and the amount of zaniness and the visual puns with something really whole and full. And I think that what Hilda and Zelda do beyond um, quelling Sabrina's
Magical
uh,
mishap.
magical mishaps is that they show exactly what Sabrina can be. And then at the end of the series, when they're in the room with her, even Zelda in spirit as a candle in the room with her, and they say, you can choose to just stop. And it's like that full moment of they go from when she's 16 and she doesn't even know she's floating above her bed, being there for her, to this moment where they can be like, here's the bridge, and you can cross it with us, and you can be like we are, where yes, we have magic, but it doesn't consume our life so much that it's all of who we are. A part of why
Mm.
Salem fails as a human and is better as a cat is because magic consumed him to a point where he couldn't be anything other than someone who wanted to take over the world through might. And
Mhm.
so I think it's not just the fact that Morgan and Roxy aren't Hilda and Zelda. It's the fact
Yes.
that Hilda and Zelda had these interests outside of Sabrina. Zelda had this great career as a physicist. She talks about going to lectures at MIT.
Mm.
She's interested in things like, yes, she wants to be there for Sabrina, but she's interested in things. And
Mm.
Hilda might be man crazy, but at that point in sitcom TV in the 90s, you didn't really have women that were fully expressing a sexual identity in the way that Hilda did. Even if we never actually see her do the deed, there's something really important about how Hilda conceptualizes sexual desire for men,
Mm.
and even Zelda in some ways. Also, classically trained, like,
Yeah.
violinist. Like, that's difficult. Like, she talked about TPing Carnegie Hall as an off thing. Like, that's not a small deal to me.
And,
Yeah.
and even though, as you say, Zelda was, so that's the other great thing about them. Zelda is very career orientated. She's the logical, orderly one. Hilda's more like the fun-loving aunt sort of thing, which again, in a relationship, sometimes you have that dynamic, which was great to show there. The thing is, though, even though Hilda was more focused on um, having fun, she did have a couple of episodes which were around her musical career and about trying to get new roles and positions. There was that great episode where she ended up, because she couldn't find a better job at the time, playing classical violin at a Texan barbecue shack. And she got so fed up with the patrons, she started drugging them and make it to be more civilized. and it just
Yeah,
backfired in her face.
it's it's really cool. I just think Sabrina as a whole, for all of its faults, is a really interesting show to look at from so many angles, which is why we ended up doing 2 episodes about it. There was something.
Mm,
It wasn't just. It does suffer a little bit from being of its time, but so does
yeah.
the nanny. The nanny also suffers from being a little bit of its time, but it's still classic enough that you can really dive into it. And we've really just scratched the surface. The thing about what we do in this podcast is it's also inviting you to kind of think about things we talk about. We now have an archive on YouTube. If you Google search in the YouTube Google search bar for the Everything is Gay podcast, we have a YouTube archive. The first episode, the Golden Girls episode, is up there now. By the time you hear this, we should have X-Men 92 up there and maybe Sabrina Part 1. But if you're listening to this as a podcast and you want to connect with us, we have plenty of ways on the Instagram, on the Twitter, um, and on the YouTube now with the archive. And, pop culture is a conversation. And it's about looking at the past to see what's going on in the present and forward. And also just because we're stone cold gays and we like talking about stuff. So that's what we're doing. Um,
Stone Cold Gaze sounds
Stone
like
cold gays. I'm gonna call my bowling league Stone Cold Gays. Um,
it. It sounds like some sort of hardcore biker gang from an 80s movie.
that's great. We're gonna go out and play ice hockey against the Mighty Ducks in just like 10 minutes time. If you just hold on to your hats.
The
Um,
human ones or the animomorphic ones?
I mean, it depends on if we have any furs in the audience or not. On that note, I think it's probably time. It's probably time to end for the evening. Thank you, Magnus, for being here to talk about Sabrina with me.
And thank you, darling, for a wonderfully engaging conversation as normal.
Yay! And we'll be back again in a couple of weeks with whatever we're going to talk about next. We haven't decided yet. But we really had to get Sabrina out of our system, and I'm very excited that we did it. And it's just the start of something because we didn't even touch on a character like Miles. We didn't touch on the grand tradition of the cameo guest star. We didn't even talk about Willard Kraft as one of the most interesting characters in Clue. So there's a lot of places we didn't go that we could have gone. And if you have something you love about Sabrina that we didn't talk about, bring it to us at the YouTube. If we end up doing a third episode for whatever reason, or if we can tangentially connect it to something in the future, we totally
Yeah,
will. Um,
indeed, indeed.
but thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great day, great evening, great afternoon, great tea time,
Yeah.
wherever you're listening from. And good night.